Uh, I'll just start off with a little light joke. Of a cute story. There's this fellow that is laying on his deathbed, and upstairs, and he knows it's the last moment, and then he he gets a whiff of somebody's baking chocolate chip cookies downstairs.
Uh,
So with his last strength, I'm bringing this up because it's relevant to the daf. With his last strength, he gets such a taiva. He wants to go down to, so he goes down the steps. Rolls out of bed, makes his way down the steps with all his last efforts, and then gets to the table, the kitchen table where the cookies are there, and he reaches up with his bare hands to grab one cookie, and all of a sudden his wife slaps him on the hand and says, "Honey, that's for after the funeral." So,
That's
so,
funny.
it's as funny as that is story. I always remember that. You'll see the Gemara is now going to discuss. We're going to learn how some Amoraim wanted to know what you're going to say about them after they die. In other words, how is the hesped going to look? And that's a half a daf on Amid Bays, on Chafei Amid Bays. How is my hesped going to look? So if you find that funny, this is the same idea. Okay, the Mishnah. We're starting from the Mishnah. Ein koirin, ein koirin. Let's learn like this: that the only one that's allowed to do kriya is the avil himself. So nobody else, even if you feel bad for the person, you're not allowed to do kriya. Kriya is midrabanan, and that was specifically for the avil himself. Let me just see. Veloy. Oh, somebody's trying to get it. Okay, done. Veloy cholsen. Cholsen, we learned before, is the last line here. Cholsen mean, hi Lewis, we're on the last line, Chaftalat Amabeis. Veloy cholsen. Nobody is allowed to uncover. Remember, when they went for to bury the dead in the cemetery, I believe they would take off their shirt and uncover their shoulder. And that was just a sign that you're just at a loss of what to do. So the only one that's permitted to do that is the oval himself. The ein mavrin. Mavrin is a halacha that we require that on the first day that you bury this person, the oval is not supposed to eat his own food. He's not supposed to pay for the meal. Somebody else is supposed to pay for the meal. And I think the reason that they do that is because when a person loses a relative, he's so distraught, he's not going to eat. If he had to pay for his own meal, he's just not going to be in the mood to eat, and we're concerned about his health. So the halacha is that he has to get fed by other people. So other people bring food for him. So this is halacha of Mavrin, is only ela kroivel shalmeis, only the person that is a relative of the person that's dying. In other words, the aval, if it's his brother, sister, father, mother, but not anybody else. The ein mavrim ela almita zukufa. The ones that are giving him to eat, they can't say, "Oh, we want to commiserate with you. We'll also sit on a low chair because you're an oval. We want to feel like you're an oval too, so we're going to commiserate with you." No, the ones that are giving him the food should be sitting on a regular chair, regular bed. Okay, let's go to the next page. Okay, we're daf chaf aleph al. So you told me that nobody is allowed to participate. Nobody is allowed to participate, and noig avelus, only the oval himself. So the Gemara says only if you're a relative of the oval, right? You're a relative. Va'afilu chacham. The Gemara's question is, even if a Talmud chacham dies, that means a chacham is somebody who's so learned that you could ask him anywhere in halacha, anywhere of Torah, and he can answer you. So if a chacham dies, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, chacham shemes, a chacham that dies, hakoil krayvav. Everybody's considered like his relative. What does that mean? Hakol krayvav sal kadaychlis. Everybody becomes his relative. I mean, he has a genetic family. Ella, what the brisa means to say, hakol kik krayvav. Everybody has the same halachas of a relative. That means hakol koirin olav. Everybody is permitted to rip their clothing. Hakol cholzeno. Everybody's allowed to do uncover the shoulder. Hakol mavrim ala berchava. And everybody is permitted to have somebody feed them food in the street, like you do by a regular oval. So we see from this brisa that it's not necessarily a relative of the oval, but when a chacham dies, everybody is supposed to tear rent his clothing and be noig avelis. So what is our Mishnah talking about? And for the Gemara, our Mishnah is not talking about only in case the lav chacham who. Our Mishnah is only talking about if somebody who is not a chacham. Okay, so that qualifies the Mishnah step one. And now the Gemara says that there's another condition. The Adam Kosher who. Let's say you have a pious individual. A pious individual is called an Adam Kosher. Like there's nothing wrong with the person. Nobody has a bad word to say about this person. He kept all the halachas. He knew how to learn a little bit of Torah, so he knew what to do. And he did things lifnim mishras adem. So he was like almost like a perfect person. So everybody still has to rip. Chayuve michayev lemikra. Then again, everybody has to rip. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, ma bonov ubenoisav shel odam mesim kishen katanim. Why loyalenu do people lose their sons and daughters when they're young, before bar mitzvah? Why should a person lose his young son and daughter? Why? Kidei sheyivka, v'yisabel al odam kosher. So he should feel sad and have aveilus on somebody else who was an odam kosher that died. So that makes no sense. The Brisa is missing something. Yivka v'yisabel. So he should cry. God takes away his children, so he should cry and be aveilus. God takes away his deposit by him. When you have children, they're deposited by you, and now all of a sudden God takes them away. So you should cry for somebody who's an Adam Kosher that died. That doesn't make sense. Ella, rather, what the Brisa means to say, it's because he did not have aveilus over an Adam Kosher. And because of that, he was very light when an Adam Kosher died. Maybe he didn't show up to the Levaya, or he was schmoozing by the Levaya, and he was doing light things, not being sad when you're supposed to be sad. So as a punishment, God will make his children to pass on. Shekol, but why? The halacha is, this is the standard. Shekol aboichum is abel al Adam Kosher. If you attend the Levaya and cry and show mourning on an Adam Kosher, on a person that's a perfect person. So if you do that, God forgives you for all your various that you did, because you're showing honor to this Adam Kosher. So, and if you don't have, so I guess that what it means is that because a person did not have aveilus of an Adam Kosher, God didn't forgive his sins. So he has all these sins, and because of that, God takes away his small children, loyalenu. But the bottom line is, the kasha is, we see that you're supposed to show aveilus on Adam Kosher. And so how does our Mishnah say, no, only relatives are supposed to show aveilus? And says the Gemara, the lav Adam Kosher who. Our Mishnah is talking about a person who is not an Adam Kosher, a regular person who died, only the relatives are supposed to be noig aveilus. Now the Gemara says, but there's another condition, there's another possibility that you can have to rip your clothing, and even if it's not your relative. Because the Gemara says, if, let's say you're a doctor and you're there when the soul departs from a person's body, so you are also required to rip your clothing. The Tanya we learned from the Brisa, Rabbi Shimon Elazar said, if a person standing by a person dying when his soul is departing from his body, chayav likroya, he has to rip. Now, why is that? What's that compared to? The Sefer Torah shenisrab shakayav likroya. A Sefer Torah that gets burnt, a person, if someone witnesses that, he has to do kriya, he has to rip his clothing. So a body of a Jew who's capable of doing Torah and mitzvahs is like a Sefer Torah that got burnt. And in other words, when he dies, he's like a Sefer Torah that got burnt. And if you witness that, you're chayav to do kriya. So the question of our Gemara is, how come our Mishnah says only relatives are supposed to do kriya? We see that even if you're non-relative, if you happen to be there by the Yitzias Neshama, you would also have to read. Since the Gemara, our Mishnah is talking about you were not there when the Neshama left. So therefore, there are three conditions that only relatives are supposed to rip. Most of the time, only relatives are supposed to rip. But if you're there, b'shas yitzias neshama, or it was an adam kosher, or a chacham, so then you have to also rip. So the Gemara continues. I'm not sure if the halacha remains that way. That if you happen to be there when somebody dies and you're not a relative, do you have to rip? I'm not sure. But Kinoch Nafshe, the Gemara tells a story. Kinoch Nafshe the Rav Safra, the great Chacham, passed away. Loi Koru Rabbanan Alai. Rabbanan did not rip their clothing. Amru, they said, Loi Gamina Mine. We never learned anything from Safra. He's not our teacher. Amalahu Abaya. So Abaya said to them, Mi Tanya, does it say in the Brisa, Harav Shemes, that your Rebbe has to die for you to rip Kriya? Chacham Shemes. It says a Chacham that dies. Anybody who's a Chacham. Tanya, every day you start thinking about what Rav Safra said. So he could be your teacher, and even if he's not your teacher, he's still a Chacham, and therefore you would have to rip. That's what Abaya told the students. Sava, my dahava hava. They said, whatever happened, happened. So they said to themselves that since we didn't rip when he died, we lost the opportunity. Amaluhu Abaya, no, you can rip all week. Tanina, we learned in the Brisa, Cholz Chacham, Cholz Manch Oiskim Behesped, Chayovim Likroya. As long as you're dealing with Hespedim, and during the week of Shiva, they would give Hespedim on this Chacham, so then you'd always have to rip by any new eulogy. Sava Lemikre La'alta, they thought, okay, since they're going to give Hespedim throughout the week, let's rip right now. Amaluhu Abaya explained to them, you have to do it when they're giving the Hesped. Tanya Chacham, by Chacham Kvoide, the honor of ripping your clothing is behesped when they're giving hesped. So therefore, wait till the next hesped, Abaya advised, and then rip. Then the Gemara says like this. Strange. New Gemara. Kinoch nafshe Rav Huna. When Rav Huna passed away, Savo loituseve Sefer Torah apurie. They wanted to put a Sefer Torah on his bed. And basically, what they were trying to say is that Rav Huna was so perfect in his adherence to the Torah that it was a symbol that Kiyem Zeh, Rav Huna kept everything that's written in the Torah. So right on his bed, they wanted to put a Sefer Torah. Amalu Rav Chizda said, let's stop that. Nilsa de Mechaya lo Svirle. In his lifetime, Rav Huna was very uncomfortable sitting on a bench with a Sefer Torah right next to him. So he would never hold of that. Are we going to do it now that he passed on? He wouldn't have agreed to such a thing. The Amar of Tachlifa said, I observed Rav Huna who wanted to sit down on a bed. There was a Sefer Torah there. The Kaf Kada Ara, he turned over a barrel, let's say, on the ground. Voice of Sefer Torah, and he put the Sefer Torah on the barrel, and he sat on the bed. So Rav Huna would never feel comfortable sitting with a Sefer Torah on the same level that he is at. So therefore, let's not put a Sefer Torah on his bed. Almas, we see Kasava, also Leishim al Gabemita Sefer Torah Munach Aleha. That it's not permitted to stay on a bed with the Sefer Torah is on it. So I think people sometimes have a custom to put the person's svarim or his writings on the mita, and they bury him with it. So as some sort of sign. Anyway, but they didn't want to put the Sefer Torah with Rav Huna. Anyway, Rav Huna, let's say, died on the attic of his house. So Lo have a nafik puriya mibava. He died on a king-size bed, and it couldn't fit through the door. So Savar l'shel shulei derech gagen. They wanted to get him out, to lower him down through the roof. Maybe there was a skylight between the first floor and the second floor. We can lower him down to the first floor through the roof. Rav Chizda said, Hagamirna, we know, Mine, Chacham Kvaide Derech Pesach. A Chacham, you don't bring him down through the roof, you lower his bed through the door. But again, the door wouldn't fit the bed that he's on, so Saba Lashnuye Bepuria Lepuria. They wanted to switch his bed. They wanted to roll his goof from one bed to a smaller bed. Rav Chizda, we have a problem over here. It's the bed that he dies, that's the bed that you should lead out his funeral in. And his honor, you can't switch the bed. The Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, How do you know for a chacham the honor is not to move him from the first bed that he passed? Shenema vayakivu es aroin el kim el agola chadasha. David HaMelech brought the aroin of God, which was in Beis Aminadav, to where the Mishkan was located, and he used the same wagon that was originally used. So therefore, this is like a signpost that you don't switch from the original bed or traveling mechanism that the Chacham passed away on. So therefore, now they're stuck. They have this large bed, doesn't fit through the door, so there's only one way. And this is the last thing that they wanted to do, but he said you have to do it. Price bavav apke. They smashed open the door. They smashed open the door opening, and they took Rav Huna out. Pasach lahu Rav Abba. Rav Abba started making the hespedim about Rav Huna. Roy ho Rabbeinu shetishra alav shchina. Rav Huna was so great that the shchina, God's presence, should have rested on him. He could have been a navi. Ela shabavel garmale, because he lived in Bavel. That's why he never got nevuah. He didn't prophesize. Masav Rav Nachman Rav Chizda. Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Chizda, was at this funeral and heard what Rav Abba said, that Rav Huna was so great, he could have been a prophet, but because he was in Bavel, that's the problem. What we find that there were prophets that prophesied in Bavel. Why? The pasuk says Yecheskel. So we see that you could have prophecy in Bavel. What's he saying in this Levaya? So Rav Chizda overheard his son kvetching on this hesped that he felt was untrue. So Rav Chizda stepped on his son Rav Chanan, or Rav Nachman, his son, who was saying this, on his shoe. I mean, be quiet. The father told his son, didn't I tell you, Loi Titrid Alma, don't say stupid things? He says, my hoya shahoya kavar. In other words, by Yecheskel, the reason why he was able to prophesize, although he lived in Bavel, was because he began a prophecy. He was already a prophet when he lived in Israel. And that's why. But Rav Huna never lived in Israel. So therefore, he couldn't prophesize. Had he lived in Israel and then moved to Bavel, perhaps he could have prophesied as well. Then the Gemara continues. So now the story again with Rav Huna. I guess they didn't bury him in Bavel in Iraq. They started to bring his body up. And it's not clear. I think what the Gemara means, they actually buried him in Bavel, and then they interned him later on to Eretz Yisrael to be buried in. And so he got temporarily buried in Bavel and then was moved to Israel. So as he's brought up to Israel, when they brought him to Israel, Amalei Ravami the Ravasi, who lived in Israel, said, they told them, Rav Huna Asi, Rav Huna just arrived. So Ravasi was so upset, they thought that Rav Huna himself came. Amri, they said, Ki Avina Hasam, when we lived in Bavel, Loi Havelala Deluya Reishimene, we couldn't lift our heads because Rav Huna was the leader, and we had no say. So now we now live in Israel. And now Rav Huna is coming here, Hashta Sina Lahachi, Asam Basrain, he's coming here, after us. In other words, now he's going to take over the leadership. But we had a nice job over here, Rabami Rabasi. Amro, so the Talmidim explained to him, not that Rav Huna himself is coming. He died. Aroineba, his coffin is coming. Oh, if that's the case, Rabami Rabasi in the fifth. Rabami Rabasi went to greet the coffin. Rav Ila, Rav Chanina, Loinofik, we're on the wide line. Rav Ila did not go to greet the coffin. We're going to explain that in a second. Ikadame, others say Rav Ila Nafik. Rav Ila went out to greet the coffin. Rav Chanina Loy Nafik. Rav Chanina did not greet the coffin. My time, what's the reason why he didn't greet the coffin? The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, if they interned a coffin and they're moving the body from place to place, so it's like a whole levaya for that day, and the avelim of the nifter have to be noyeg avelis and say birkas avelim and they menachem oval for that day. So the loy nafik my tamat. So why didn't they go out? The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, or na oivel l'mokan l'mokan, eina in the middle of shuva, eina in the middle of avelim, v'tanchum avelim. So another Brisa says that if you're turning a body, you don't have to have birkas avelim. You don't have to make a levaya out of it. So kashin hadodi. So it's difficult. How do you resolve that? One brisa says when you intern a body to Israel, you do have to make a levaya, and the other brisa says you don't. So the Gemara says, "Like Kasha, it's not difficult." Kan sheshilda kayamis, kan b'she'ein shilda kayamis. If the skeleton is still intact, then you have to have a noyeg avelis. Kan b'she'ein shilda kayamis. When the skeleton is not intact, it's just a bunch of dirt and a little bone here and there. You don't have to noyeg avelis. So the Gemara says, Rav Shuna shilda kayamis haba. Certainly, Rav Huna, no matter how much time he was buried in Bavel, his shilda was kayamis. His body was intact. So why didn't they go out? The reason why he didn't go out, loy saime kamei. They didn't realize it. They thought that he was interned and his body was not intact. So the other people that didn't go to the Levaya felt that might as well continue learning. Ramre. Now they have a problem, right? Where do we bury Rav Huna? He made it to Israel. Now where do we bury him? We want to bury him amongst people who are just as great as a righteous person as he was. So they decided Rav Huna rebates Torah b'Yisrael. Rav Huna spread Torah in the Jewish people. Rav Chia, who died in Israel, also rebates Torah b'Yisrael. So they're going to decide to put him right next to Rav Chia. The problem is Rav Chia was buried in this crypt with next to his sons, Chizkiah. And the Gemara is going to say it like this. Hava man ma'ilme. So the question was, who's going to bring and go into this cave to bury Rav Huna next to Rav Chia? So the Gemara says, Amaluhu Rav Chaga. Rav Chaga said, Ano ma'ilme. I can do the job. First of all, I'm qualified. Not because I'm strong. It's because the Akimte Talmide. I know I learned the entire Talmud. Ki have a bar tmani sarishin. When I was just 18 years old, I was mastered the Talmud. Like Chazili carry, and I never had a nocturnal emission. In other words, I learned betaharo, impurity. U'mishamale kamei, and I served Rav Huna in his lifetime, v'yadi by bodei, and I know his customs. I know what Rav Huna was all about. And he says just a little story about Rav Huna. The Yom Echad one day is hapicha le ritzua de tefillim. The ritzua of the tefillim turned over. In other words, let's say the shel rosh, which you put around your head, the black part, he accidentally did not realize it, and the white part was showing. The Yosef, and when he realized that, it's the bad halacha ma'ashem Sinai is that the black part is supposed to show when you're wearing the tefillim. The Yosef lay, because of this avera, Rav Huna sat aboy in Tanisa. He sat for 40 days in fasting. So great. So therefore, they selected this Rav Chaga to take Rav Huna's body alone into this cave where Rav Chia is buried next to his son, next to his two sons, Yehuda and Chizkiah. So the Gemara says, "Havegani Yehuda mimeni davia, the Chizkiah mismolei." Yehuda was standing on the right side of his father, and Chizkiah was on the left side. So the father Rav Chia in the middle, and on his right was Yehuda, and on the left was Chizkiah. Amalei Yehuda l'Chizkiah. So one brother, Yehuda, said to his another brother. I guess you see, when tzaddikim are buried, they're not really dead; they're just sleeping. So Yehuda said to Chizkiah, "Kum b'dichta, you have to move from your place. The lav orik are the koyim Rav Huna. It's not respectful that Rav Huna is staying over here. You have to just get up a little bit and show respect to Rav Huna. They're burying him here." But how did they call him? When Chizkiah got up, come bahadei amud denur. All of a sudden, a flash of light, of radiation came out. Chazia Rav Chaza saw this. Ivis, he got so scared. Zakafe la aroina. He put the oren to block the light from coming to him, and unafak, and then he ran out. Awesome. And he came, and that's how they left the body. I don't know who buried him. Why didn't he get hurt? Because he put up in front of him the coffin Rav Huna that somehow protected him. 3 lines from the bottom of Chafei Ma'alef. Now the Gemara says, when Rav Chisda passed on, they wanted to put a Sefer Torah next to his bed. Rav Yitzchak said, Nilsa the Rabbi his master, his teacher, Rav Huna would never do such a thing. And now naked and Evidle, we're going to do that. We're going to put a Sefer Torah on his bed. Savar the Loy Lamishba Kara'ai. after the Levaya, they thought they will never, after doing Kriya, they thought they would never temporarily sew up their clothing. Even when you rip your clothing for a chacham, when turning around and from the back of the bed, in other words, when you're going home from the funeral, you're allowed to pin up your kriya. In other words, the kriya doesn't, it's not that you're sitting shiva. The kriya, you can temporarily start fixing it. The Gemara says, last line of the page, these two people, Rabba Bar Huna and Rav Hamnuna, died on the same day. I don't know, something must have happened. So again, we see this often that in Bavel, they brought sometimes the great Amoraim to be buried in Israel. Askinu lahasam. They brought them to Israel. So, well, Chafayim Beis, Kimate Agushra, they got to a special type of, let's say, a bridge, and only one person could go on that bridge. Kamu Gamole. So the camels, one camel was carrying the box, the body of Rav Hamnuna. One was carrying the box of Rabba Bar Huna. So who goes first? Amalu ati haya my high. What's going on over here? This Arab says, how come nobody's crossing the bridge? Amrulay, so Rabbanam, Amrulay, so they told this Arab that Rabbanan de Ka'avdi Yakara Hadadi. The Rabbanan are trying to give honor to each other. Mar Omar, so to speak. They're dead, but they're almost like talking to each other. Rabba says, Mar Ne'abaresha, you Rav Huna should go on the bridge first. Mar Omar, Rav Hamnuna says back to Rabba Bar Huna, Mar Ne'abaresha, you should go first. So who's going to settle this? So this is a traffic jam. You can't cross the bridge. Omar, so this Arab said, Dinahu, I think the Rabba Bar Huna Le'abaresha. Rabba Bar Huna should go first, because he's Rabba and his father was a great person. Khalif Gamalid Rabba Bar Huna. So Rabba Bar Huna went first, but because Nasura Kave, the Shine Dahu Tayah, the teeth fell out of this Arab, because Rav Hamnuna is slighted. He decided that Rabba Bar Huna should go first, and Rav Hamnuna should go last. So he was slighted. This Arab lost his teeth. Now, the Gemara says like this: Psach alei hahu yanaika. They used to have this poetic young person, Yanuka, is a smart, talented person to give the hesped, and he would say like a poem or a riddle that just moved everybody. So this is what he's saying about the double avaya over here. The double avaya again is Rabba Bar Huna and Rav Hamnuna. This is what he said: Geza Yeshishim Olam Ibava. A nice growth, a cut of a growth came up from Bavel to Israel, and basically he was saying this offshoot is a son of a great person, which is Rabba Bar Huna. The Imai, together with them, Sefer Milchamas, a book of wars, which is a reference from Hamnuna, who was a study partner maybe of Rabba Bar Huna, and they would war in the war of Torah. There's a double curse over here. Two great tzaddikim are dead at the same time. Lirish b'shoid b'sheva abba mashina, to see the great destruction that it's coming from that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did in Shinar. Shinar is another name of Bavel. Kotzav al Olamai. God was so angry on his world. So when God's angry on his world, tzaddikim die. V'chamas minenu nefashis. He robbed souls from us humans. But when God robs a tzaddik, God is happy because the soul comes up and to be near God. V'samach abahem kechala chadasha. God is happy like he has a new bride. Roicha v'araves, the God that rides in the heavens. Sus is joyful. V'samach v'voy a love when it comes to him. Nefesh naki. Souls that are clean, that never stole in their life, the tzaddik, and they're completely righteous. They kept the Torah bein adam lamakan. Again, kinach nafshe Ravina. When Ravina passed on, kinach nafshe Ravina, pasach aluha hu saftar. The eulogizer made the speech. I guess they had special people doing the eulogy. They said, the eulogizer said, tomorrow he roish, date trees, shake your heads. Al tzaddik katomar, on this great tzaddik who is like a date tree. Tzaddikim are like katoma yifrach. Noshim leilas kiyomim. Well, let's cry day and night. Al mesim leilas kiyomim, on someone who learned Torah day and night. Now comes the story that I discussed with you earlier, and with this we'll end. The Gemara says like this: Amalei Rav Ashi le bar Amalei Rav Ashi le bar Kipok. Rav Ashi said to Bar Kipok, "Hahu yaimei my amet." Like one line before the wide lines. When I die, what are you going to say about me? Amalei. So Bar Kipok said, "Amina, I'm going to say, in Bar Rozin, if a great cedar tree, naflo shall havis, a fire burnt down a great cedar tree, ma yasu ezav kir. What can little grass on the wall do in the face of a great fire? It certainly will burn. In other words, if God takes this great cedar tree and he wasn't saved from death, certainly we're not going to be saved from death. Lev Yosef, this great fish, was raised up by a hook. In other words, God took away Rav Ashi, maybe because of one avera that he did, like you lift a fish with a hook. Mayasa de Geirakak. What's the small fish going to do? If God could, if the Malach HaMavis, so to speak, can could kill the great Leviathan, so then of course small fish can definitely be caught. But Nachal Shoitif Nafal Chaka, in a great roaring river, all of a sudden it can dry up. Mayasa may govern. What should a small puddle do? In other words, if God could do this to you, certainly we should all be nervous. So that was that Rakipak's eulogy of Rav Ashi. Amalei Bar Oven. Bar Oven, who overheard this conversation, he said, Chas v'shalom. I would never say such a thing as a eulogy for Rav Ashi. The Chaka v'shal heves v'tzadiki amini. Would you say that God, when the Malach HaMavis takes away Rav Ashi, it's like he dried out a river, or he burned down a great cedar tree? In other words, maybe he was saying is that when God takes away a tzaddik, don't think he has nothing to do with the world, and he doesn't concern himself with the people he left behind. Like as almost when you burn down a tree, there's nothing left. No, so I would never say such a thing. My Amrit, I would say something else. B'chul la'avelim, us mourners should cry, v'loy la'aveda. But the person that was lost doesn't have to cry. Rav Ashi doesn't have to cry because he's in a better place. Shehilim nucha, he's going to a resting place. Va'anu and us, la'anaka, are going to a sighing mourning place. Anyway, so Rav Ashi had these two people suggest what they would say when he passed on. Chalash daite, Rav Ashi felt very insulted or slighted. His hapech karehu, and because he was insulted by such a, I guess he didn't feel this was enough of a hesped. Their feet, this Bar Kipok's feet and this Bar Oven's feet got twisted. In other words, imagine the knee pointing upwards. In other words, a person's foot, you're wearing a cast and you have to wear your leg, upwards, back, towards your hind leg. So their feet was that way, crooked. And because they injured themselves, when Rav Ashi passed on, they were not there to do the hesped for Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi used to say, Loiv bar kiputz cholitz, loiv bar oven cholitz. Because their feet are pointing in the wrong direction, they're pointing, in the wrong direction upwards. You can't do chalitza if they were in the situation of chalitza. Chalitza has to be done by a person, by the woman taking off the shoe of a normal person who's wearing the shoes in the normal fashion, not when his foot is tied backwards and his feet are in the up position. One more piece and then we'll stop. Rava, he have a asala diglas when Rava, when he came to the Diglas River, I guess when Rava passed on, they came to the Diglas River. Bar Oven, they told Bar Oven, Kum Ema Milsa, say the hesped. Ka'ova Omar, he said about Rava, Bo Roiv Shlishus Bamayim, the most of Klal Yisrael fell in water. Zechor v'rachem, remember and have mercy. Te'ina macharecha, we strayed from following after God. Ki isha mibalo, like a woman who strays away from her husband. Al taznichenu, don't leave us. Ois me mora, like the ice of the bitter waters. So basically, this Bar Oven was the normal hesped, but he was not there when Rav Ashi, because Rav Ashi did not like his planned eulogy that he was going to say. So we will begin tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, from Rab Chanan, about like 8 lines from the wide lines.
It's very nice. Thank you, Baruch, for taking time out from the chasana.
Yeah, I enjoy. I love this.
I just want to. It's an amazing thing. I just thought of something. I had about 20 years ago in my practice, just to show you that a yichus, an Adel Jew who had no affiliation whatsoever, except that Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah he used to keep, but not Shomer Shabbos, but a very soft-spoken Jew. His last name was Turgaman.
Wow.
Yeah, his name was Daniel. Such a sweet. You could look into his eyes and see there's a flame. And I would talk to him about it, but not affiliation. But his name was Turgaman. So he must have had a yichus. He was obviously his yichus was that his ancestors were Turgamans. It's amazing.
Right.
Daniel. His name was Daniel Turgaman. That's what his name was. Amazing.
Very, very interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
Have a good have a nice chasana, and thank you very much.
Okay, but we continue tomorrow. Zaygazen, everybody.
Thank you.
Save me a piece of laker.
Yes, I will. Take care.